to some clinical trials. So the first I want to talk about is a compound called CT1812. And so this is a study in mild to moderate dementia with Lewy bodies. It was awarded by a grant by the National Institutes of Aging to Cognition Therapeutics and myself. And so this is a first-in-class small molecule, okay? It works at a receptor called the sigma-2 receptor. But what's important, it seemed to selectively displace or block the ability of both amyloid beta protein and alpha-synuclein to bind to brain cells. So it seems to protect the synapse, those important connections between cells, that's how they communicate, seems to protect the synapse from the toxic effects of these amyloid and synuclein proteins. Okay, so this is a study that's ongoing right now, a phase 2 study in 120 sites. So I have this little cartoon here, and so the synapse is basically the connections between one cell and another cell. Now they don't actually touch. There's a gap, and this gap is chemical transmission going back and forth. So if we blow this picture up here, there are receptors here where the oligomers, those clumps of protein, can bind to and cause cell damage. Okay, the sigma-2 receptor is part of that complex that binds the oligomer, right? So by acting at that sigma-2 receptor, you can block the ability of those oligomers to bind to cells. So I'll show you some pictures. So this is a cell culture. So these are cells that are grown on a plate. And so we can see that this one has lots of little synuclein oligomers, all these red dots, okay? And they're binding to the cell. And if we treat the cells with CT1812, then we can displace those little synuclein oligomers from the cell, and that potentially can protect it. And we can demonstrate this when we use looking at the plasma of people who had Parkinson's disease, and we can see that we can change sort of the trafficking of the proteins through the cell, right? So it can have very beneficial effect by modulating this particular receptor. So where are we with this study? 120 people we're looking for in 30 to 40 centers across the US, and we're testing 2 doses, a low dose, 100 milligrams, and a higher dose, 300 milligrams, against a placebo. There's 40 people in each arm. So it's a 1-to-1-to-1 randomization. So if you're in the trial, you have a 66% chance of being on drug. Okay. The primary thing we look for in an early study is safety and tolerability, but we're also looking and seeing whether it works, whether there's efficacy. So we're measuring cognition in a couple of different ways, both pencil and paper and computerized test. We're looking at symptoms, so fluctuations, sleepiness, Parkinson motor features, their overall global abilities, their activities of daily living, their behaviors. So we're capturing all this. And we're also looking to see if we can actually change the amount of synuclein, that's the building block of Lewy bodies, pathology in skin, okay, because that we can get to very easy through a skin biopsy. So this trial is looking for people 50 to 85 with probable DLB, and they're allowed to be on a stable dose of their symptomatic medicine. And so they have to be in the mild to moderate stage. So we have a screening test called the mini mental state exam, and this is the mild to moderate range. For exclusion, you can't have a diagnosis other than DLB. People who are actively depressed are not eligible. People who are not living in their own homes are not eligible because we need a regular caregiver. And there are other things that we typically exclude people for in clinical trials that I won't go through here. So to date, we randomized the first person back last June. We've screened over 121 people with more people in the pipeline. 13 of the sites are from the Lewy Body Dementia Research Center of Excellence programs. So we expect to finish enrollment in this study by the end of the first quarter of 2024, which means we hope to have a readout of the study, by the summer or fall of 2024. So not that much, less than a year from now, we should have a readout from this study. So we're really excited about this. There are some challenges that we've overcome. And again, I'm not going to dwell on these things, but anytime you do a study, there are lots of tricks to getting this done. I want to mention another study. This is called RewinD, Lewy body, or RewinD-LB. This is a compound developed by EIP Pharma, neflamapimod. And so this was also a grant from NIH to EIP Pharma and myself. And this is also a first-in-class molecule. And this is a specific inhibitor of a enzyme inside a cell. It's called a kinase. And this may protect those cells in the brain that make acetylcholine. Okay, so it's a neuroprotective study. So this is a phase 2b study in 160 individuals. Why is it a phase 2b? Because it's the second phase 2 study that was done. This was the phase 2a study, the ASCEND-LB. So this was a shorter study, 16 weeks, looking at cognition and safety. And what they found was that there were benefits on global cognition and movement, but in particular, which was really important, is that if we looked at people who had more Alzheimer pathology, they were less responsive to this medicine than the people who had less Alzheimer pathology. Okay, so remember I said there are two ways of designing these disease-modifying trials, right? One, the drug might work on multiple proteins, or two, you want to select the right patient who's most likely to benefit from the medication. So in this case, for this trial, the phase 2b, we're selecting the people who have the low Alzheimer pathology because they're going to be much more likely to respond. So we're able to enrich the strategy to recruit people. So 160 people, we have the same type of outcomes. They're slightly different, but the same types of outcomes, both global and cognitive outcomes, along with safety, roughly the same sort of age groups. But this time we have this exclusion for too much Alzheimer pathology. We can measure this in blood. To date, we randomized the first person last month in August of 2023. We have had a number of people screened. There have been some failures, and it's due to this elevated phospho-tau, this elevated Alzheimer protein. So we're much more likely to be able to see things, right? And we hope to finish this trial sometime toward the end of March 2024. Also looking for a readout in the fall of 2024. So fall of 2024 is going to be a really exciting time in Lewy body dementia. Okay. In the last minute, I just want to say some other things that are happening. So this is another study that hopefully we're waiting to hear our award notice. So this is a vaccine, and this is a prevention vaccine. And I'm not going to go through all the science. I just want to say that there's lots of really cool things happening. So there are drugs that are being repurposed. There are drugs that are neuroprotective and disease modifying. And there's also some things being developed that potentially could prevent disease. And this is an example of that. So this was done in cells and in mice, and it was able to sort of reverse the deficits and improve both cognition and motor speed. And when we looked at the brains of those mice, the vehicle is sort of placebo, and the compound here is the vaccine. And these are the abnormal dots. These are Lewy body-like structures, and you can see there's a lot less of them if we treat the mouse. So very excited about this. Right, so to summarize, dementia with Lewy bodies is a common cause of dementia for which there are no approved treatments in the US. In order to develop treatments, we need to design better studies, design and develop specific biomarkers and specific outcomes. To date, a lot of the phase 2 studies have failed to meet their primary outcome, but I think we've learned a lot from those studies as to how to design better studies, and those really exciting approaches are currently in clinical trial, right? So CT1812, right, is a sigma-2 receptor. It works on both amyloid and synuclein. Neflamapimod is a kinase inhibitor. It's neuroprotective for those cells that make acetylcholine in the brain, but is probably going to be most effective if there's not a lot of Alzheimer pathology. So two different strategies, but both disease modifying and very powerful. And I just showed you a little snippet of a vaccine trial to try to prevent people from ever developing the disease, right? But all the things we talked about, really, the focus is on developing disease modifying medications. In order to develop treatments, we need to design better studies, design and develop specific biomarkers and specific outcomes. To date, a lot of the phase 2 studies have failed to meet their primary outcome, But I think we've learned a lot from those studies as to how to design better studies. And those really exciting approaches are currently in clinical trial, right? So CT1812, right, is a sigma-2 receptor. It works on both amyloid and synuclein. Neflamapimod is a kinase inhibitor. It's neuroprotective for those cells that make acetylcholine in the brain, but is probably going to be most effective if there's not a lot of Alzheimer pathology. So two different strategies, but both disease modifying and very powerful. And I just showed you a little snippet of a vaccine trial to try to prevent people from ever developing the disease, right? But all the things we talked about, really, the focus is on developing disease-modifying medications. And of course, if that doesn't work, then we can just go to our local store. We can buy some brain gum because, that's going to work. I'm kidding. Of course, that's not going to work. So I'm going to end right here, and I'm happy to take